I mentioned earlier, you got an idea of the vision of one man, his interpretation of subjects that interest him. I think the appropriate way to start out, thank you, the appropriate way to start this out, and before I forget, I want to thank the President, Ruth Simmons, for providing this forum for us. She was kind enough to help put this all together. And also to Helen Scorsese, Marty's wife, who is a constant source of inspiration to Marty, as well as incredibly helpful to me, because I can't remember 10% of what Marty ever says to me. Nor can I understand a lot of it when it comes to film theory. But on practical issues, Marty, talk to the group about why the subjects and the difficulties in getting films made. Why can you ever do anything that's easy? I mean,
but I guess any film is not really easy. I mean, I would think, but I think you're driven by something that's like an obsession, I would think, and before you realize that you have your eye through the eyepiece and you say, we're crazy. How the hell do we ever think we're going to do this? This is madness. But you keep going. You keep going, and I never really thought otherwise. I actually thought people wanted to see that kind of film. And the industry changed. I started making Mean Streets was 73, so, you know, Taxi Driver and Raging Bull in New York, New York, particularly, and Last Waltz, and that. Last Waltz was somewhat of a different story, but I actually had no, I really was surprised that there would be resistance to like Taxi Driver, for example. It was very difficult to get made. And certainly Last Temptation of Christ, I understood there would have been some controversy, but usually from certain areas, not necessarily what happened at the time. So we just go ahead, and then, you know, eventually there's some studio people, and in the case of Taxi Driver, it was a combination of De Niro and myself. He had just done Godfather 2. Mean Streets, when I did Mean Streets, I brought the answer print up to show Francis Coppola in San Francisco, and he hired De Niro for Godfather 2 based on that. That led to Taxi Driver, and then Raging Bull was a project of De Niro's, really.
Right. Let's talk about the fact that you're not really a Hollywood director in the vernacular or connotation of the typical director that goes out and makes commercial films.
Yeah.
And that's not something that's ever, you know, you're part American filmmaker, part European filmmaker.
Yeah.
We've spoken often about something that I think is interesting, in that Marty has one of the lowest ratios of development to made product of any filmmaker. Most filmmakers develop hundreds of ideas before they'll develop one. And almost everything that Marty developed, starting even in, what was Gangs of New York, in the late 70s?
Late 70s, yeah.
And it took 24, 25 years to get it actually made. Talk to us about what your influences are and why you don't fall into any particular category in your mind.
I mean, I really thought I was a Hollywood director. This was the thing. We wanted to be Hollywood directors, but at the same time, Hollywood was, the old Hollywood was really pretty much finished by early 60s, mid 60s. And so I was influenced greatly by European films, and I think I saw neorealist films on television in New York around the age of 5 years old or 6 years old, and my family being Sicilians and Sicilian American, all gathered around the TV set, and my grandparents were crying, and these things that were on the screen, Paisa by Rossellini and Bicycle Thief by De Sica, they had a certain truth to them that I saw. What do I know? I was a child in a family, your parents are gods, and they're saying this is the truth. And it is the truth. It is the truth. That doesn't mean that certain codified films and styles in Hollywood are not truthful also, but there were two different things in a way. And I guess that left such a strong impression on me. And over the years, Italian cinema developed even more strongly. In the 50s, I remember seeing La Strada by Fellini dubbed in English in the Lower East Theater. It was sent around as a regular programmer. It wasn't even shown as a foreign film. It was so popular. Won the Academy Award and things like that. And then Fellini developed into other things, and Antonioni came out, and then by the late 50s, early 60s, you had this extraordinary body of work coming from France and Italy, England, Japan, a number of other places.
Michael Powell.
Yeah, and Powell Pressburger was even earlier. They're from the 40s, and we saw their films on television. We caught up with them in the late 60s, early 70s. So it was almost, everything was contemporary. And I always thought that that world cinema would become like the cinema I knew, late 60s, early 70s. I thought that it was going to be the norm. There were going to be controversial subjects, subject matter that would engage the audience, not cutting out completely just pure entertainment and commercial cinema in that sense. But commercial cinema was in the 70s cinema that engaged and cinema that provoked. And I thought everything was going to go that way. And by 82, that had all changed.
And the family in the films and the religious implications in all the films, notwithstanding the films that have been made about religious issues, but talk to us about the family and the kitchen and the scenes with your mother.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole business of Italian American, her making the sauce and that sort of thing, is basically the way I grew up. Although that furniture with the plastic cover and the plastic covers, it wasn't that way, because what had happened was a long story, but basically, they were raised, they had, my mother's side of the family, 8 children, my father's side, 9 children. My father was born in 241 Elizabeth Street, my mother was born across the street, 232. One represented Police Generosa from Sicily. My mother's building was Cimina from Sicily. There were like little villages. There was a big sit-down when they wanted to get married because it wasn't the same nationality, as my mother said. So, I mean, you're coming from a place that was like, but the reality is that we lived in 253 for about 25 years, and they moved across the street to a renovated building. That's when they changed that furniture, and that's when I shot that film. But the furniture we grew up with wasn't exactly that way. But anyway, you still couldn't put your feet on it, though. You still couldn't put your shoes on the couch. But in any event, the family was the center of everything, and although my parents were not that religious, they didn't take religion seriously because my grandparents came from Sicily, peasants, had no work. And certainly Sicily, particularly in the late 19th century, early 20th century, many, many years of Sicilian history, they just didn't take government or the church seriously because they were screwed by both of them constantly. So, they came to America. Well, that's the way it is. And you read Verga. Read the short stories of Verga. You'll see. Tony Randall turned me on to those, actually, when we were doing King of Comedy. It was very interesting. I didn't know about it, because there were no books in my house. There were my parents were working class. They didn't read, so it was television and films that I saw, and I started reading later. But in any event, it's important because I took the religion seriously. I had terrible asthma, and when we were living in the Lower East Side, it was a pretty rough place, and I really couldn't, I wasn't athletic, and I couldn't fight very well, and that's what I was, comic relief, basically, on the streets. And so I just found myself in the church or in a movie theater, and so I took the church more seriously. But I saw religion being played out in the family every night. My father came home from work, and my mother came home from work. There'd be dinner, and usually it was an argument. But, I have an older brother, and there was all kinds of East of Eden kind of tensions. And it was pretty rough. But what was being worked out was a morality was being worked out at the table. Morality in a world that was a jungle. Was a jungle. And my father, in that neighborhood, I got to say that this has to do with the religious aspect. In that neighborhood, they always tell stories now, mean streets and Sopranos and things like that. But the thing about it is that, yes, there were those figures, but basically the people were decent, hardworking people who were trying to make a living for themselves, lower working class, and just trying to keep the kids away from the alcoholics on the Bowery, and from getting involved with the rougher element in that neighborhood. But my father was involved. My father grew up with them, and he didn't know any other world. He wasn't educated. He couldn't go anywhere. So he had to live with that. So in a sense, his working out of morality, which was really taking care of my uncle, his younger brother, which is what you see in Mean Streets. About 10 years ago, I realized the film really isn't about me. It's about my father and his brother, even though I sort of lived similar things at that time. But the reality of am I my brother's keeper? Who is to take? What are the obligations in a family? So in a sense, I saw religion really being worked out the way it should be, which is in your daily life, not necessarily in a church.
But you draw on so many references, like in Goodfellas. I remember when you were casting Goodfellas, and you had the faces of all these people up that weren't really actors.
Yeah, no, we mixed. I love documentaries, and one of my parents that we just showed the beginning of, Italian American, taught me a lot, and taught me a lot about acting, and taught me a lot about, even though I had seen every Bergman film ever made, and the Bergman film, you could just take a close-up, and they talk for 25 minutes, it's brilliant. It's just amazing, And still, I was influenced by Wells and Paul Pressburger and Cassavetes and all that sort of thing. So but what I realized with my parents, it took that angle like that, and they'd talk, and my mother would overlap with him, and we'd pan over and that sort of thing. And basically, the documentary had a very strong impact.
Who was the guy with the beard that we kept seeing?
A guy named Lee Osborne who worked at NYU. He was taking
No,
the
the
sound.
other guy that.
Oh, the guy with the beard, that was me.
Oh, okay.
That was me. I just grown the beard. My father didn't like it because I went to NYU and they were communists there.
I think. No, I'm not.
But it was wonderful. It was wonderful because they started to come to NYU then. I put them in my student films, and then suddenly they started to grow. And so finally they were living in Hollywood for a little bit. We put them in Raging Bull, My Mother in Goodfellas, and that sort of thing. So they really opened up their world.
We'll talk about that scene,
Yeah.
because unfortunately we didn't have time to put
Yeah,
that scene.
yeah, no, it was a lot of clips.
The
I know.
Goodfellas scene with your mother in the kitchen while you've got a body in the trunk of a car while the group
Well, we never told her that.
Yeah.
But she would have said, "What do you mean there's a body in the car?" Mom, just, But we put 2 cameras down, and basically there was 2 lines written. There were only 2 lines written. The rest was improvised between her. And she you could hear her off camera, too, yelling at Rupert. Mom, and he's saying, "Who are you talking to down there?" And that was my mother, too. So she kind of took, what was interesting, having them around was a good device to knock the arrogance out of yourself sometimes when you're trying to work, because they would say, "Did you eat? Where are you going?" "Oh, Marty, you're going to do another take?" And I'd say, "Mind your business. What are you, working for the studio? Get out of here. Go stand in the corner. Get out of here." So, I mean, really get to the point. How long are you going to be here? The actors are dying. What are you, Shut up. That was the kind of thing that went on. So, with Bob was not Robert De Niro. That was Marty's friend, my son's friend. And Joe Pesci was my son's friend, and she loved them. They're like family members. So that's what you see in that scene. The idea that Joe Pesci is a psychopathic killer is still her son. And that's the way she looked at it. He's a little excitable. That's the way she looked at it. So you have that warmth between the two of them. That, you ask any mother in most cases, "Oh, my son was really good. He never would have done something like that unless they antagonized him in some way." And she didn't want to know about it. So that's what we played on. That's what we played on a lot. But the religious aspects, I took the religion much more seriously than the older Sicilians who knew better.
But it always appears in Gangs of New York. There's this wonderful scene where Happy Jack goes into the church, and he and Amsterdam have a confrontation, and then the walls fall, the scaffolding falls.
He killed him, yeah.
And the crucifix appears as an old master painting almost.
Yeah. That's a pretty pathetic reference to this great movie, Ashes and Diamonds by Andre Vita. You got to see this one. This is amazing. This thing is just formative. Even the glasses with the fire on them was from Ashes and Diamonds. But that was about a young man played by a guy named Cebulski, who became sort of at the time the Polish James Dean. He was an extraordinary international star with sunglasses that we use the same sunglasses in Mean Streets as a reference too. And he was killed 3 years later at the age of 36 or something during the shoot of another Vita film, by freak accident on a train. But he was an extraordinary actor, and Vita was very, very, one of the great masters of world cinema. And basically, I don't want to get into the story of it, but basically it's Warsaw, it's the end of the war, and he's been killing Nazis. Now all of a sudden he's hired to kill the latest communist official who's coming in to settle the town up, in Warsaw. And, it wasn't Warsaw, it was another city, but everything was destroyed. And he's talking with this young woman in one scene. You hear a creaking, and camera pulls back. They're in ruins. It's at night, and camera pulls back, and then suddenly you see an arm come into frame. It's swinging. It's a crucifix upside down. That's just, beyond belief. That's just one moment in that film. It's so beautiful because he's a man who kills. He's killing Nazis. Now he has to kill communists, and he falls in love, though. The minute he falls in love, he gets killed. That's the end of the film. It all takes place in one night, and it's quite extraordinary. But because I know the original one. I say, well, that one's interesting, what we did, but... So
are there a lot of images from referential films over the past 50 years?
I think so, but in some cases they were, inspired and pushed me to go further. In other cases, they're just, you just cannot do what a shot like that is so, it's clearly in Ashes and Diamonds, you can't do that. So, but the emotional power of it, I think, I try to get the similar emotional power by the scaffolding to be crashing, and then suddenly the dust comes up and you see the crucifix over the...
Let's talk about emotional power for a moment, because I think it's a really interesting point. On 2 clips here, and you and I were sort of whispering to each other about it. In Mean Streets, you've got that wonderful tracking scene when Bobby's walking in and you see Harvey Keitel.
Jumping Jack Flash, yeah.
And Against Music, which is an interesting theme that Marty was one of the first filmmakers to really use contemporary music in an interesting way to drive storyline and change the emotions of the audience without them even realizing what was happening. And you see the camera move in on Keitel, and he's not moving at all. He's almost like statuary.
Yeah.
And the camera moves in on him. We see that again, and we see it in Goodfellas, and we see it in Casino with that scene where De Niro has no dialogue at all.
I know. He's hooked. He's doomed.
But you're telling a story without any words at all.
I try not to. But when you're going to have the words, I mean, you do a scene like the improvisation between De Niro and Keitel in the back room, which gives you an example. That's literally the way I grew up. And it was inspired by De Niro. He said, I think we have to see Johnny Boy work on Charlie. We got to see why he's charming. We got to see why Charlie loves him. And that was, I said, okay, and we shot that. We begged the producers for like half a day more shooting, and we got that just in 3 setups, bang, and wide and over the shoulder. But I don't mind, as I say, Bergman film, sometimes a 25-minute monologue goes through, and it's just extraordinary.
And Marty, what about your style as it's changed from, for example, the complexity of the early films like Raging Bull and up to the abstraction of Kundun and which was very much like abstract painting, and the way you have changed your style?
I think style was interesting. I never really figured I had a style. It was just my sense of pulling from different vocabulary that I picked up, everything from Edwin S. Porter to Eisenstein to, as I say, Andre Vita to so many other great filmmakers. And so it somehow went through music in my mind, and I would listen to music, and the images would come from the music. And for many years.
Talk a little bit about music.
Well, the music was basically, it was one thing we had in the house. It was always music, and the first music I remember hearing was Django Reinhardt and the Hot Club of France, which is a French swing, actually gypsy guitarist, and Stefan Grappelli on violin. And that was late 30s. My father had those records. He liked guitars. So I would listen to that. And at 5 or 6, 4 years old, I would imagine these pictures. And it's very speedy. They sail, and he takes off. Woody Allen did that great film, Sweet and Low Down, I think it's called, with Sean Penn. That's the guitarist I'm talking about. And it's, in any event, that would make me dream. That was before we had television. I would listen to radio.
Right.
And I would just sit and listen to those records.
What radio is?
Radio was just was only sound. There was no picture. The picture was better, though, very often. It was in your head. It was amazing what you'd imagine, And so that's what Orson Welles brought to cinema, too, theater and radio, in a sense. The sound in his films are amazing. But in any event, the music was the key thing. And then music was played when we were living on the Lower East Side, particularly in the summer. The windows were open. We'd see things in the street, fights or people dancing or something. And there'd be music coming from different windows, different places, whether it was rock and roll, swing, or opera, or anything like that. So that my life was scored with music that I never heard in a film. So I said, if I ever make a film, I'd put this song against that. And very often it was quite ironic counterpoint with some pretty awful scene going on down there and this happy, swinging music going on in the background. And it was pretty interesting. And so that's how I saw the world. And I think Mean Streets was the first one to do that little last picture show.
But remember, this was all pre-MTV, and this was not acceptable in formatting.
No, you had to have a score, traditional score. But I also had listened to, let's say, the music in Paths of Glory, a Stanley Kubrick's film, where he liked drums, you see, and the percussion in that film is interesting. And then, of course, his use of music in 2001. And so, for me, and of course, you can't forget the extraordinary Scorpio Rising, Kenneth Anger, an underground film that was made in San Francisco with use of popular music. It's hard to describe the picture. Those of you who've seen it,
you can't forget it if you don't know about it.
Yeah, no. This is a famous. He just got the LA Film Critics Lifetime Achievement Award the other day. Kenneth Anger is quite extraordinary, great artist. And anyway, but it was a 25-minute film, and I saw that, and I said, well, people could do it. And so I just took the music that I knew of and put it in Mean Streets, and again in Alice. Taxi Driver, Travis didn't listen to music, so I said the only man who could do the score would be Bernard Herrmann. And it would turn out to be his last score, unfortunately. And New York, again, it was all standards.
And talk for a moment before we take some questions about that great scene with Ray Liotta as he's driving and that music starts to speed up.
Oh, in The Last Day as a Wise Guy? Yeah, I know. But the way the music montage in that is the way I hear music. In other words, a piece will be in my mind for a little while, and then something else will slide in, a note, and that was, to give you an example, the way I, he's listening to Memo from Turner. You had Memo from Turner by Mick Jagger and Ry Cooder from the soundtrack of Performance, which slides into The Who Live at Leeds, which then goes into Monkey Man by the Rolling Stones, and then another piece, and then Muddy Waters comes in, and it all goes in like that, and then some, that's what happens, and particularly if it's fueled by cocaine in any way, that can make it even go faster, and so you'd see. I wanted to give the impression, if anybody who had never taken a drug like that, give you the last 15 minutes of the film, or the 10 minutes of the film, will give you an impression of what it would be like, particularly if it's been overused.
Let's,
especially those helicopters and paranoia, which, but he was right. What was interesting, the most important thing about the drug-related thinking, or the sense of the emotion of it, is that the tomato sauce is as important as the helicopters. It's madness, total madness. The guy's completely clinically insane at that point.
But it was an interesting use of music to show the definition of a character where he's gone just off the deep end.
Yeah, he's gone.
You cranked up the music to the point where we were sitting in a preview when he first...
Terrible preview.
It was an interesting evening. We were sitting in a preview of the film, and it was not a film that at that time I think the public was ready for. And I remember when that scene came on, well, the stabbing scene sort of set it up.
Yeah, but it was a preview, and I had more... Unfortunately, I know it's fake. So I left, 10 times, 12 times, didn't work with the audience because after 3 times, and it was a big bread knife, and so it was pretty obvious what was going on. You certainly didn't, we just left it a little long. Everything's a little long when you shoot, and then you realize, okay, but let's take out about 20 of those, They made the point.
Anyways, let's take some, you did, let's take some questions.
I just wanted to preface the question by saying that in 1973, my brother-in-law was a student at NYU, and he said, come down and see this movie by my former production teacher, which was you, Marty, at NYU. From that day and 30 years ago, I've never looked at cinema the same way. I mean, it's changed me dramatically, and it culminates with Gangs of New York, because I think it's an operatic, brilliant movie, and I think a lot of people would agree here with me. Question is that in the scene from where McGloin is taunting Amsterdam in the bar there, he calls him a fiddlin' Benz, which is very reminiscent to a delectably reminiscent part in Mean Streets. When they go collect the debt and you call me a mook.
Yeah, it just turned out that way. And I realized not only was it reminiscent of Mean Streets, but more so of the traditional. How should I put it? It's an obligatory scene, usually in a Western, is really what it's about, where the young boy and the newcomer has to prove himself, usually. Very male society, has to prove himself there, particularly if he's going to take over the confidence, he's going to worm his way into the confidence of the power that be, the powers that be, which is Bill the Butcher. So, it was more in terms of Westerns, I was thinking there, as we were doing it. This is more like a Western.
By the way, whatever you extracted out of Daniel Day-Lewis was magnificent.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.
Okay. Go ahead. Right there in the brown shirt. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's somebody behind you. Go ahead.
Oh,
No, go ahead.
But you got the mic. Just go with
okay,
it.
is this working? Okay.
Yeah.
I just quickly want to preface my question by adding something similar to what he just said. I had a similar experience, and when the year Goodfellas came out, I was, I think, 13 years old, and it was the first R-rated movie my father let me see. And it completely changed my life and the life of all my film-loving friends, to the point where my junior year in high school, we were sitting around once, and all of a sudden we all looked at each other and went, what did we talk about before Goodfellas? And Mr. Scorsese, it is a tremendous pleasure to be able to see you in person today.
Oh, thank you.
And I just want to ask about Gangs of New York. I think everybody is going to want to ask about Gangs. I, too, think it is a great film.
Thank you.
There should be more films like that made. The lack of vision and ambition in the American film industry is tragic today. And I just want to ask you that it's.
Okay, sorry.
The film has been in preparation for 20 years, you know.
Well, yeah, for 20, more than that, really. I was 7 years old when I heard that story about the Irish surrounding the church, because it really happened. It happened in 1844. I have it happen in 1863. But yeah, it was really, really something that grew up out of the streets. My father told me stories of the gangs he had heard when he was growing up, Irish gangs. And so it was a folklore that I grew up with in that neighborhood. That is the oldest church in New York. I mean, the oldest Catholic church in New York, St. Patrick's Old Cathedral. And that's where everything's centered. The Anglos and the Know-Nothings, they were called. The Know-Nothings and the Wide Awakes would try to attack that church, and then they stopped when they saw the entire Irish-American community
Was it
surrounding
St. Mark's
the church.
Cathedral?
I'm sorry?
Was it St. Mark's Cathedral?
At St. Patrick's Cathedral on Mott Street.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm from Boston, I know nothing.
Well, I understand.
My question is this.
That's another story.
It's been in preparation for a very long time. And number one, how has it changed over the 20 years? What remained from your original notion and what's changed? And number two, could you just briefly talk a little bit about the music, your use of music, which I thought was fantastic.
How does it change is a good point, because if I made it, I don't know if I would have made it in the 70s, quite honestly. I don't think we had it right. But the interesting thing is that I don't look at this film that turned out to be Gangs of New York, I don't look at it as a completed film. I see it as a sort of work in progress in my head. I think if I'm around another 10 years, it would be a different story. There'd be a different story in the foreground. The history always stayed. The historical aspects, I knew, and also the beginning was very, very tight to the original script back in 1978 about the gangs fighting. You don't know where you are until you see the boom up of the city, and you see New York 1846. And the draft riots were the same, and the scene in the Chinese pagoda was the same. But we kept evolving the story over the years, and it kind of changed as I changed. And I think it would have been originally, I don't think we even had a chance to sit down and do a rewrite of the first draft. The industry changed immediately. It was by 1980. And I knew at that time I was close to the group The Clash. I liked their music. I liked those kids. They were. Joe Strummer unfortunately died. I mean, I met Paul Simonon in London the other night. It was just, there was such an inspiration. They were so great. I wanted the whole picture to look like them, And I even wanted their music, to write music for it. But that would have been quite something. But the time changed, and ultimately, this is the story as I did it now in the year 2002, 2003. This is it. I was more interested in revealing the impression of a place, kind of a place and a time, to be living in a place like this. I wanted to give you a real impression of that. I don't say it's accurate, but then we switch and we stretch the facts, and it's more of an opera, I should say more of a fever dream, a drugged kind of dream in a way. And that scene in the pagoda where DiCaprio almost gets his head smashed, and that is, in a sense, where somebody was saying, shall I take out his heart, his liver? And the guy said, no, his heart. He has no heart. Kill him. It's like a nightmare. The logic is like a nightmare by that point. Really, it's maybe not a very good answer. I don't know what it would have been in late 1979 if we'd even made it. In the mid-'80s, there was no way to get it done. They weren't making that kind of film anymore on that big a budget. It was too much money to rebuild Lower Manhattan because none of that existed in New York. And as far as the music is concerned, I heard music 20 years ago when I was editing Raging Bull. 23 years ago, it was a fife and drum. And it was from, I saw it, I think, on an Alan Lomax documentary on PBS. And I said, what is that sound? It's amazing. I saw these guys in Mississippi. Three guys had drums around their necks, and this other guy was leading them at a fife. And I never heard anything quite like it. It turned out to be the African slaves took it from the fife and drum signals that were given in the Revolutionary Army to change positions, change tactics. And they took it and transformed it. And I said, that's the music that Gangs of New York will be based on. And that's what you hear at the beginning and certainly during the draft riots. And then the rest, Robbie Robertson gave me a lot of stuff from Alan Lomax and so many pieces of music that seemed like the period, or just sometimes we cheated a little bit and put some blues in there that wouldn't exactly have happened at that time, but we were leading towards it. in the sense, the mixture of Anglo, Irish, Celt music with African music. That was America. Yes?
I wanted to ask you a quick question. I just wanted to ask you a question based on the clips that we saw tonight. One of the things that I thought was interesting was that in Raging Bull, Mean Streets, and Goodfellas, you would use a roaming shot that created depth, but it was usually in a narrow space, like the hallway in Goodfellas,
Yeah.
the bar in Mean Streets, and then the crowd for which there was a small opening for
Right,
De Niro
right.
to be walking through. And then cut quickly into a close-up shot, like De Niro talking and going off in Mean Streets, or a close-up of the fight, or a close-up of Ray Liotta. And I'm interested in maybe why you seem to maybe stylistically move between
well,
those things. And there aren't a lot of mid-range shots in
No,
those scenes.
I grew up in a neighborhood. If you go in there, the hallways were really narrow, claustrophobic. I'm serious. And the hallways are great. I mean, so many things happen in those halls. So much drama, so much going
Is there a
on.
reason why
And there was a
you
light
like
bulb.
the close-up shot more
Well,
than like a...
I'm getting to it.
Sorry.
And that is that. That's the way I see things. It just turns out that way. Even with Jesus and Judas in Jerusalem, I had him do one very important scene in a hallway, an alleyway of an old ruin of an old mosque, actually. And I said, here we are. We have all of the rest of. We have the Atlas Mountains in the background, but we're shooting these two guys sitting in this area in an alley because what they're talking about has to be confidential and quiet, and invariably it is tighter. You do get tighter. You see people close up all the time because you're on top of each other. I mean, the Gangs of New York is an example of that too. Although I tend to use a wider screen and show the people from mid knees, let's say, up, because I wanted to show them in relationship to their environment, because the environment was everything really in that time and place, and to a certain extent. I mean, because basically you get off a boat, you have no job, you got to eat. Where are you going to get You're going to get money. You're not going to get any money. They're not going to give you a job. Where do you get the food? You get hungry enough, you kill. It's a simple thing. And so everybody's on top of each other. In Gangs of New York, it's like a Western only, no wide open spaces. It's all claustrophobic. And I think that has colored a lot of the way I see things. Yes. Who's got the mic? They gave up on the mic. Okay, yeah.
What is the status of your long-discussed Nick Tosh's Dean Martin project? And have you ever, even for a couple of seconds, seriously considered directing a Western?
Well, yeah, the thing is, I think the Western is gangs. I mean, basically. I have thought of, at times, but I love the Western so much. My darling Clementine, The Searchers really is the key one for me. I was 13 years old when I saw that John Ford film, and even though Lindsay Anderson, who wrote about Ford and lauded Ford to a great extent, up to The Searchers. He felt The Searchers was not the traditional Ford film. Maybe that's why I liked it so much, because the hero of Ethan Edwards, played by John Wayne, was complicated, and he was quite neurotic, and he was shaken by these traumas of the country, the Civil War, the outskirts with the Native Americans, and his hatred, his racism, is extraordinary in the film. It's a very powerful. It reminds me a little bit of his character that Wayne played in Red River, the father in Red River, to Montgomery Clift, which has a little bit of in Gangs of New York. There's a little bit of that in there, that relationship. And so the Western, I don't really know what to do. I mean, it's been done by such great filmmakers over the years, and I think it has to do more with a certain time in American history too, the American century. I think we're seeing things a little differently now. I hope, maybe not, but things. The point of view is different now in a way. And maybe they were making those Westerns only about 20 years at a time, 1860 to 1880, or maybe 30 years, 1860, 1890, But in any event, as far as the other question, what was it? Dean Martin, no, that was a project that Warner Brothers wanted me to do, and Nick Pileggi and I worked on the script for a very long time, and we just sort of left it, and everything kind of changed, and then Terry Semel and Bob Daly left the studio. Actually, what happened was I had a chance to do Gangs of New York, and I did that instead.
Okay. Up here. Go ahead.
Yes, if you were to see a script, you must see lots of scripts. When a script comes across your desk and you look at it, what's the hallmark of a great script? How do you know you want to choose that one over the thousands or hundreds of others that you look at? What pops out at you? What are the
Personal. Usually, I don't read other people's scripts. And I usually develop something, or I have something in mind, and I work with a friend. Usually, in some cases, Nick Pileggi, in other cases, Jay Cox, and or hire Paul Schrader for Bringing Out the Dead. But for example, when Taxi Driver was given to me to read by Brian De Palma, I hadn't done Mean Streets yet, and so, but he said, you'd be great for this. And automatically, I mean, there had to be an emotional connection to the material and to the characters. The obsessiveness of Travis Bickle, the sense of being the outsider and not being the dispossessed. That's how we felt that way. I mean, myself, and I could speak for De Niro to a certain extent because we didn't articulate it that way. I can't really say, we're outsiders here. We were trying to get in.
But very,
we were trying to stay in Hollywood. This thing is,
few of the films came from scripts. I mean, most of Marty's works come from ideas and books, and he then developed scripts. In the early years, there were some screenplays, but as you progressed on,
Alice was a screenplay, and then, but certainly Taxi Driver. When you got that, I said, this one has to be made, and we just knew it. And but after that, no. After that, the world developed the way Mike said. I think yes, I think so. New York Stories, for example, Life Lessons with Nick Nolte. That was based on. I'd always wanted to do something of Dostoevsky, because actually the first Dostoevsky I read was Notes from Underground. That was Taxi Driver, really. So, I say, hey, I feel like that. That's me. That sort of thing. So you really identify with it. And then I got this hang up. I wanted to do The Gambler, but I wasn't quite right. I didn't know how to do The Gambler. And Schrader and I talked about it a lot. But I found it was interesting. I think her name is Anna Paulina, maybe wrong, but Dostoevsky's mistress, when he was 52 years old, she was 21, her student, and she has diaries, and that became New York Stories. That developed over 20 years.
Go ahead. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Just pass that mic around.
So I'll take the mic. Okay. I was just wondering, I was watching your personal journeys through American film recently, and I was amazed at how you're just so open about how you're still learning. Learning from, obviously, filmmakers of the past. I was wondering if there's anybody today that influences you, any contemporary filmmakers, and if you even have a chance to watch any films. I know you're so busy, obviously.
I think what's important, if you see that documentary on American movies, and I say it's a personal journey, it's eccentric. It's not the classic American films. There's Orson Welles' Citizen Kane because it was so important, sort of like as Godard said, in the silent period, Griffith gave us everything, and then in the sound period, it was Welles. But primarily, they are, I like to look, I see films and I love two scenes in them, or one scene or one line of dialogue. I'll talk about that as an extraordinary thing you must see. You have to learn, you got to sit through some stuff that you may not like. Some people say, he used the best parts of some of those films. Well, not really. Not really. I mean, if you see the whole film, you experience it. I usually found certain scenes or the attitude of a film and overlooking sometimes bad acting or bad dialogue. Some of the dialogue, the blunt dialogue, let's say, of Samuel Fuller is offensive to a lot of people, particularly those with a very literary background. They really, really get very angry when they see those films. And it has more to do with pulp newspapers. It has to do with tabloid. He was a newspaper man. And he was up. He was at the Big Red One. He was up the boot of Italy, in World War II. So he's a whole different thing. And it's like that cigar and selling that story. So man kills wife over a football game. What? And then that sort of thing. So the films that I see now, I try to keep up. Towards the end of the year, I see many of the Hollywood films. I find that there's sort of an American renaissance now, which I'm very pleased. I've had late 90s all the way through now. People like Wes Anderson, Paul Anderson. Alexander Payne, a number of others I'm forgetting. Who? Kimberly Pierce's film, Boys Don't Cry, right? Yeah, very good. And what the hell was the other? There's a number of them. Richard Linklater films, I thought, Slackers, which was 10 years ago, I thought was really interesting. A really great picture.
Let's take some questions.
And the other thing was I saw a film yesterday, for example, which kept me, refreshed my mind. I don't know, it's not my style, but it's a Chinese film called Yi Yi, by Edward Yang. So I watched the DVD of it on a giant screen in 3 hours, and The way that I'm interested to see how the visual interpretation and the emotional impact. And sometimes certain Taiwanese films are hard for me to follow. And this one was quite extraordinary, I thought.
Over on the side here, right here, the white.
I'm wondering, when you're trying to make a film and you come up against obstacles and barriers, what do you attribute your strong dedication to getting that film made?
Really, hysteria, usually. Hysteria and obsession and anger, I think, mainly anger. I'm mad all the time. Mike can tell you, just, angry, pain in the neck. That's why I use humor a lot, because it deflates myself. I don't want to take it seriously, because if I really do, I would have been gone much longer. 25 years ago, I wouldn't have survived. But the anger is enormous about everything. About everything. And so that also fuels me to make a picture, I think. But keeping the sense of humor is the key thing, the irony. The irony, when you get there in the morning and you get a note that one actor has had a nervous breakdown and he can't go on with the film. It happened. It happened.
They don't want to come out of it.
Yeah, they don't want to come out of the trailer.
Go ahead, right here in the black sweater.
What are you going to do? Get a heart attack otherwise. Or you kill someone, it's not good. That's true. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the role of editing? You often work with the same editor. Do you think of editing as being your primary tool for completing your vision, or does it start somewhere else with everything?
That's a very good question about editing, because I do feel it's the primary tool. I mean, the scripting, structure, as much as possible. Like Goodfellas was all on the script. Age of Innocence, all on the script, based on the novel, of course, but it was restructured in the script. And Casino, all on the script, too. Kundun, we changed around the structure and the editing, but the editing for me is the most important part. It's the part I like the most. It's also torturous, but it is the best part. And I think there's a great deficiency I have in terms of lighting, in a way, or Mike would argue with that. But and I pointed out there's a story, Steve Spielberg has extraordinary lighting, and we know each other over 30 some odd years. And he'd just get up there, okay, now 6,000 people coming from this frame, and then we pan over to, wait a minute, how's he doing all that? And the light beams in this way, and it's, my God, look at that light. Well, we talk about stories and over the years, and I realized he came from Phoenix, Arizona, and it was a whole thing about a scene in Empire of the Sun where he knew it was a shot of the last samurai taking their sake against the rising sun, a real rising sun, and he was shooting in Shanghai. And I said, how did you get that shot? He said, well, I saw that in the morning. I got there before the crew, and I saw there was a mist on the ground. I knew that the sun would come up that way. And so I got the camera, and the cameraman wasn't even there. He got the assistant cameraman. He just shot it. And I said, see that? I said, I come from New York. All I saw were hallways, light bulbs. That's it, man. I never saw the sun. So I said, I love John Ford, and you see the lighting in John Ford films. I can never do it, But in the case of Michael Ballhaus, the lighting is very strong. But editing is very important. I remember Elia Kazan was very important in his films in my life. And he was one of the few, I think he was the only Hollywood director, quote unquote Hollywood, because he was really an independent, came to talk at NYU because he was working at Lincoln Center at the time in 1965 with this brilliant film, America, America, had come out. And he just addressed the student body like this just for about an hour and a half. And he was, at that time, that wasn't done. You didn't get a director, forget it. There was no way they weren't going to come and talk to kids. So, anyway, he came in. He was in his raincoat, he was talking. And somebody asked him, and here's the man who invented, in a sense, modern theater in a way, and the acting style from 1947 on. And I didn't even realize that because I never went to theater. We couldn't afford theater. We were a working class thing. So just saw movies. But he said, some kid asked him, he said, well, if you're starting in the business now, what would you have done differently? Where would you have started? He said, I'd start in the editing room, he said, not in theater. It was very interesting because he found his way in cinema to a certain extent. Right after America, America kind of ebbed off, and he eventually wrote novels. But there are many other directors who stay and find it in theater. And find it in theater, you see them reflected in many of the films made today, that they're more theater pieces to a certain extent. That's not a criticism, because some of them are quite extraordinary.
The white shirt there.
Could you talk a little bit about the breakdown of creative control on the pictures you've worked on, and what relationship or structural scheme has worked best between yourself, the producer, the DP, and the editor?
I could go from the DP and the editor. The editor I worked with in the past 20-some-odd years, Thelma Schoonmaker, whom I met at NYU. And, but I did Mean Streets and Alice and Taxi in New York, and Last Waltz without her. But then she came in on Raging Bull and stayed with me. She knows what I like, and she knows how to do it to a certain extent. And I usually give her I usually design the shots and the editing order in drawings way beforehand, in most cases. And so the creative control stays that way because she's a friend and she's very loyal. She will argue at times and discuss, and I say, okay, let me see what you got there. And very often, no, leave it, it's good. You're Talking to Me sequence was done by one editor who was a great dean of editors in a sense, Tom Rolfe. He was helping edit. Marshall Lucas was the real editor on the film, and he came in for about a few weeks, Tom Rolfe, in cutting. And I showed him the rushes of this improvisation that De Niro did in front of the mirror. I said, I like that, I like that, I like that. And normally I sit there and work with them, but he doesn't work that way. So I said, okay, let me go out. Came back in the afternoon, he showed me that cut. I said, don't touch it. Do not touch it. Just let it be. You know, it was just beautiful, flawless. And but normally I work very closely, but then I do some of the editing. I used to do some of the editing myself. Mean Streets I cut and that sort of thing, but I was not in the union, so you don't get credit for that. But on the film. But in any event, I felt the editing was very important. That's what I learned in school, and I learned how to design pictures by imagining the shots in my head. But the creative control with the studio is different with each project, I think. How do you say it?
I think on the editing side, though, you're being modest because you were the last director to not cut behind yourself as the film went, and you really worked yourself with Thelma. And this last picture, Gangs, which, by the way, Gangs this morning was nominated for 12 BAFTA Awards, which is the British Academy Awards, which has happened this morning.
That's good.
I think that the interesting thing to note on Gangs was when we saw the first cut of it in a screening room, there were 4 of us in the room, and it ran 3
hours, 38 minutes.
And
which is pretty good for a film that eventually was going to be about 2:48 or 2:46.
But the nature of the film was like it was a living organism, and what he did with it is that it changed in each cut into a metamorphosis of what you saw. If you saw the first cut of the film, even though it is the scenes that you see in the final cut, the work that Marty did on it is quite intricate in changing things.
What happens there too, Gangs of New York is an interesting example because what happens there too is the editing becomes, I find in a lot of cases, it becomes also the extension of the writing and the rewriting, especially in Gangs and in other films that we made. A few other Kundun that happened a lot, where we restructured a lot of the film. And Kundun was difficult because it was abstract. It was, to grow as a filmmaker, I'm not interested in going towards a bigger $200 million film that is a splashy, beautifully made, chase pictures, things like that, action films. Other people are doing it much better than me. I can never do it. But I figured to try, between that and Age of Innocence, something growing, to go inside rather than outside. And it was extremely difficult in Kundun because the nature of the drama was inaction is action. And that was very hard to sell in terms of drama. There was not traditional Western dramaturgy. I was going another way with it. And that was also helped and sort of rewritten in the editing with myself, Thelma, and the writer, Melissa. But in any event, the control of a picture, the more money, the more you have to fight for control.
I want to take control now. The program isn't over, but the questions are.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. I think that. You want him to stay there?
Yeah, both of you can come over.
Do I stay?
I'm not going to be able to stay there.
Well, that was really phenomenal. I want to introduce my colleague, Michael Silverman, who is the chair of Modern Culture and Media. And today, Michael and I have the real privilege of representing our colleagues in the Creative Arts Council, which is represented by creative writing, theater, speech and dance, music, visual art, the Bell Gallery, and the Rights and Reasons Theater. Now, which one did I leave out? Great. Okay, Michael. One sec.
I just want to recall Michael Office's mention of the fact that almost 40 years ago, Mr. Scorsese, you entered a short film in a competition held by the Brown Film Society.
Right.
It's What's a Nice Girl Like You?
Yeah, and that's the first film I ever made, yeah.
Yeah. And you got $25 first prize.
That's right.
And you must have been emboldened by that because the next year you entered another film.
Yes.
It's Not You, Murray.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And you won first prize.
Yeah.
And that was $100. As
Yes, that's right.
Our records show this.
Yes.
And then for some reason we stopped giving you awards.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to rectify this today by giving you this sort of in the midst of a lifetime achievement award.
Thank you.
And I'll read the text here. It says, Brown University Creative Arts Council, with great admiration and respect, we honor Martin Scorsese, America's foremost living film director, for the body of his work and its contribution to American and world cinema, for his unstinting efforts to preserve our film heritage with special effort on American and Italian film, for his uncompromising personal vision, demonstrating that even within commercial cinema, an individual voice can be heard and can reach millions, and finally for his steadfast refusal to turn his eye away from the dark dreams that lie at the heart of our culture, and for showing us an occasional moment of redemption. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.